Lustpodden riktar sig till alla som är intresserade av lust och relationer i terapi. Podden leds av religionshistorikern och teologen Leif Karlsson och Hanna Möllås som är legitimerad barnmorska, legitimerad psykoterapeut och sexolog med flera auktorisationer i sexologi. Dagens lustpodd är lite annorlunda. Idag så gästas vi av Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers från USA som är på Sverige besök från Seattle. Jag nämnde bland annat om henne i avsnitt 68 som hette När religionen har lurat mig på sexuell njutning. Och där berättade jag om hur hon i en bok har skrivit hur det går att arbeta bort sexuell skam. Jag lägger ut allt det här som vi pratar om hennes böcker och hennes arbete på hemsidan så kan ni fördjupa er mer. Det här samtalet idag kommer bli på engelska, men i nästa avsnitt så kommer Leif och jag tala vidare om det och om Tinas arbete, så då sammanfattar vi lite av det som sägs i intervjun idag. But now I want to welcome you, Dr. Tina, and it's an honor to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you and have this conversation. It's also so fun to look up at all of your books and see books I love and friends I have, and it just makes me happy.
Yeah.
Sex at Dawn. Oh gosh, so many great things up there.
And it's so cool that you know so many of the authors. It's amazing.
Wonderful people.
I'm starstruck, but I'll try to keep it together.
Yeah. I could tell you fun stories. I'm seeing a David Schnarch book over your shoulder, and David and I would go at it back in the day.
Oh, you did?
Well, because of sexuality and spirituality, you know, David said some amazing things in his first book or his big book, but he ultimately didn't agree with the power behind spirituality in sexuality. And so I would say, I think you're missing something really important here. You think wall socket sex is just about intimacy. It's bigger than that. And I think you should be exploring. I do think that he should. And he unfortunately died last year.
Yeah,
I mean, it was just sudden. Yeah, a really good friend of mine was actually in consultation with him.
Because I heard him lecture when I studied sexology in Gothenburg. So I heard him a couple of times. And he talked a little bit about spirituality, but he didn't explore it. He didn't. You know, in the deep end. So that's so interesting. Okay. This is so nice. And I must ask, how is it that you're in Sweden?
Well, I grew up in a Swedish immigrant home in Washington State. So it was and is my people in many ways. And I just hadn't come back since I was 17. And so I'm a little older now and looking forward to spending more time back here in Sweden. So this first trip back, I came to see my good friend Tina Nevin. And then I'm already planning for next year.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah.
You'll come back.
I am planning to come back.
Oh, that is so nice. You have many titles concerning sexuality and the things that we talk about in this show and in this podcast. So would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I began as a teacher, junior high school teacher, and then I decided I needed to go back and study family therapy, that I really wanted to understand how to create shift and change for families to support them to be more successful. After doing that, I ended up being invited to teach in the program that I had just graduated from and got involved in medical family therapy, which is really looking at the impact of chronic illnesses on people's lives, but also how we train physicians and how to help physicians do better doctor-patient relationship skills, that kind of thing. So did that for a number of years. So I'm licensed as a family therapist, did lots of stuff around medical family therapy. And as I was teaching in the graduate marriage and family therapy program, that I was in, I was asked to teach their human sexuality course, which is a course required for licensure for marriage and family therapists in the state of Washington. And I was excited to teach that course. I'd been teaching sexuality at the junior high and high school level forever. I was very comfortable with it because of the family that I happened to grow up in. And I taught that course for all of the years that I was there, so almost 30 years. Oh. I started teaching it in the early 1990s, and around the year 2000, I began to notice that there was a dramatic increase in the amount of sexual shame, so just self-hatred and humiliation and naivete that people had about their sexuality. And that really drove me to go get my doctorate degree in clinical sexology. I wanted to understand the human side of and breadth of sexuality that humans experience. And I wanted to be able to speak into the sexual shame that I was seeing in the lives of my students and in the lives of my clients, and started doing research around that. So that led to me becoming certified as a sex therapist, having my PhD in clinical sexology, and then later writing a book on the impact of sexual shame on people's lives and on their ability to do attachment well and do intimacy and pleasure and connection well. And how did we get in a place where you don't do sexuality well, which we don't in the United States. We don't do sexuality well. We don't train in it well. So it led to really that. Yeah, because I feel like my career has been circuitous, but it's been following where have we been as institutions acting in harmful ways when we don't mean to. And in that sort of last stint, it was really the role that the church has played, the broader Western church has played in not supporting people in doing relationships well.
It's so nice to having you here, but it would be very interesting to know how come that you have focused a lot about spirituality and sexuality. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think that fundamentally growing up, I had a deep respect and understanding for who we were as humans. And as I did work in medical family therapy, I began to get language about that. So it's really who we are, biopsychosocial, spiritual, sexual. So the body of us, our mind and how that works, our relationships and how that works, and the role that sexuality might play in our lives, even though that's demonstrated and lived out in many, many ways, in people's lives. I really think of us as an integrated whole. Yeah. And yet we don't train well in that way as an integrated whole. We don't. And we actually, I don't think, ever have. So as I began to see how much pain there was in the lives of students and in clients around the integration of sexuality and spirituality, that they felt so unworthy of love and belonging. They felt inadequate. They felt disgusting. They felt like they had a hard time seeing how valuable they were as humans. And that played into their spirituality because they often had a paradigm by which to think about themselves. They understood a God, and yet they saw that God as punishing as opposed to loving, right? And so this way in which those two things had been used to hurt people, which I don't think was intentional, but it came out of the mind-body split that had been a part of our culture for thousands of years. And when you make the body and its desires bad, and you make spirituality good, which is what had happened in like the 4th century or 3rd or 4th century, then you have people at war within themselves because they are the whole. Yeah. And then when you go to love, using your body, which is what we have to love with, then that's all called into question. Even though it is such a pure thing to love and to give love and to receive love and to nourish love, that was called into question. People called themselves into question. So it really grew out of watching the pain in people's lives and really believing at the heart of me that we are not meant to see ourselves as unworthy of love and belonging. We are meant to see ourselves as very worthy and very valuable. And yet that wasn't happening for so many people.
So what is your own relationship to Christianity and the evangelical church?
Yeah, that's I love that question. So it helps to know a little bit of American history. And I'm not exactly sure what's happened all in Sweden, but in the 60s, we had the hippies and it was a time where we got birth control in 1965. Roe v. Wade passed in 1973. There were a lot of women coming forward and saying, I have thoughts and ideas and ways I want to be too. And it was in the church at that point, we called it the Jesus movement. Yeah. That it was a time when who Jesus was as a character was really held up as this is somebody who stands up for those who are oppressed, who, fights for those who have been treated in unjust ways. It's all about grace and love and acceptance and owning in many ways our humanity instead of judging, acting like gods ourselves, and judging each other. And I got introduced to that Jesus when I was 14. I was a figure skater at the time. I was in Southern California, which was a time when the Jesus movement, a place where the Jesus movement was exploding. So I started going to concerts on Saturday night with a bunch of friends and hearing this great music. And I'm thinking, I love this Jesus. Like, this is my kind of person, Yeah. And because I was all about those things myself. And it was very much a part of the ethic in my family. So I kind of fell in love with that Jesus. And that was what was Christianity to me. Yeah. Then in the late 70s, early 80s, there was this reaction that happened in America. It was a reaction to second wave feminism. There was an economic downturn that happened around 1980. And then AIDS hit the East Coast. And then the West Coast in 80, 85. So there was all this fear because no one understood. And so like many, many, many times in human history, where there has been a lot of fear in the public, those in power take that vulnerability and they try to use it. And that's what happened. There was, unbeknownst to lots of people, there was a socio-political movement that began to happen to try to get the conservative, fear-based group of people to be more, in our case, Republican, more about fear. And so things came out like family values and all this kind of, but actually what was happening behind the scenes was this was really a push in increasing capitalism and helping the wealthy get wealthier. And there started to be where we had regulations in banks to protect the all, those got removed. Where we had regulations in media to protect the public, those got removed. And so now those corporations and those banks began to really grow, and the people who owned and ran them began to become very wealthy. But what was being presented out front to the public was, we are protecting you. And sexuality is dangerous. Women are dangerous. Illnesses are caused by people who aren't straight, right? All these things. And people were just like grabbing a hold of this. And the church took, and probably the largest church was the Southern Baptist Church, that was really kind of leading things. It took a stark turn to the conservative, to the right. And we began to have a program called True Love Waits that is about purity rings and committing to never having sex before your straight marriage later in life. And we began to pump money, government money, into abstinence education. So it wasn't just happening in the churches. Again, this was a socio-political movement. Prior to this, we had a value of separation of church and state. But beginning in 1980, we began to merge them. And the kind of teaching that was happening in the churches was now happening in the schools around fear. Sex is dangerous and we need to be afraid of it. And since 1980, we've done research on the quality of that education and now know that 80% of that education was medically inaccurate. To this day, right now in the United States, out of 50 states, only 17 states have passed laws requiring sex education to be medically accurate. So we have had now 40 some odd years of this becoming very legalistic, both in the church, but also in the government, in the socio-political movement in the United States. That's very much about men being in charge, men being in charge of women and their lives. And it actually is really about helping the rich get richer and not taking care of each other, because we just don't do that very well. And so that's in my own family. It wasn't a religious family, but it was a family that believed in justice and it believed in caring for each other. I think there were a lot of, the way I understood, was a lot of Swedish values, it felt like to me. And we were also very comfortable around bodies and sexuality. And so I learned about those things like you learn about recipes and brushing your teeth. And it happened all the time. There was never a talk. No. There was lots of them along the way. With all of my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and my uncles, and everyone. And so I began to realize that I had grown up in a very different kind of home, and I had a very different set of values, just as the culture was making a very sharp turn from a more egalitarian way of thinking to a much more patriarchal and strict way of thinking. And unfortunately, in the whole of my career now, over 40 years, we have yet to return to the way things were in the 70s, where we were making more space for people who were different. So, I mean, it was not perfect by any stretch then, but we have certainly not gone forward.
Thank you so much for that very personal answer. It was very good, because I didn't prepare you for that question. I'm sorry.
Completely fine.
But it was very good, because I think it makes us also understand more about your work now that we're going to talk about, because the clients you've met through your life, but also now as a supervisor, and you teach a lot of people who want to become sexologists. What are the questions that they come with?
I think one of the things you hear most often is, I'm doing the work of therapy, and I realize that I feel really insecure in walking into their questions or concerns around intimacy, around sexuality, around pain, around low desire, high desire, differences of desire. And I don't know what to do. I find myself feeling like I not only don't have any answers, but I don't have any words. And I need more training. And so that's often how people come. I also hear from people who have seen therapists and haven't had that part of their lives acknowledged at all, or have dropped hints and the therapist doesn't pick it up, or the therapist or physician or educator or clergy offers information that doesn't sit right with them, And so there's an increasing, I think, awareness that clinicians of all ilk need to be trained in this more holistic kind of way, and to recognize that when you get out of your grad training, whatever that is, to really look at, how was I trained around the biological, the psychological, the relational, the sexual, and the spiritual, and where I see that might be lacking somewhere. That's really the first place that I need to get more training, so that at least in that biopsychosocial, spiritual, sexual, I feel like I've gotten the training that were holes in my own grad training. And we all have them, right? I think grad training would need to be a couple years longer if we were going to cover those things. And we are in fields that we are expected to keep learning. So I think it's fine to be able to say, okay, in those 5 areas, where am I really lacking? What can I do right now to gain that training, so that I am more competent and confident as I sit with people who bring me their stories, wherever their stories might go. Because I think for so long we thought about sex therapists as an other, like a specialist, as opposed to people are going to come with their stories, and their stories are going to go all over the place. Is it fair to them that when they go into the realm of sexuality, or they go into the realm of spirituality, that we just then immediately refer them on, and now we've kind of abandoned them, right? And a lot of times people won't go to that person. And so I think it really is on us as clinicians, as family therapists, as physicians, whatever the deal is, that it is on us to become trained in an integrated way so we can hold people better, hear them better, help them figure out their way to more wellness and growth.
So if someone would come to you as a therapist and say, well, I love to work as a therapist, but I can't talk about sexuality. That is something I don't want to talk about. What would you say to that person?
I would ask questions, you know. I would say, well, tell me more about that. What does sexuality mean to you? Why does that feel so off base for you? And tell me about the part of you that thinks that you don't have a responsibility to that within yourself and to someone else. Like, help me understand that. I think that we don't do a good job in our culture. So I don't think it's weird that somebody would feel that at all. But I do think it's worth asking yourself questions around, because our clients out there in the world, they think we're trained.
Yes, exactly.
Biopsychosocial, spiritual, sexual. They come to us thinking that we have the training. So is it ethical that we don't say right off the bat, I don't have training here?
Oh, it's so interesting. I love this because I've heard it so many times from family therapists that have said that, oh, I can talk to them about their relationship, but I send them to you as a sexologist when we come to the sex part. And I think it's so sad because there's something lacking in the whole therapy then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we are communicating back to them that this is a separate part of them, as opposed to, nope, this is the whole of you and it's been with you since you were itty bitty and it's a wonderful part. Yeah. We hold people differently when we're trained in an integrated, comprehensive way. We hold them different. We walk with them different. We listen different. Our fears aren't there. I mean, because we've done our work. And I absolutely believe that people get much, much better care. And it's interesting, since I started an institute, because we didn't have any training in my part of the United States, the people who come through and get that training, they're full. Within 6 months, they're full. And they don't have room for more people because they just hold people differently. Yes. And the word gets out, you know? So it's really, I mean, I like to invite people to think about the ethics of not being trained and then the ethics of becoming trained.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I'm falling in love. So you've written several books. Would you like to tell us about them?
Sure. So the first one is called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. And it came out of beginning to understand the amount of pain that had come from growing up during abstinence education, whether that was happening in your public schools or whether that was happening in your youth groups or wherever, that you were being given the message, not just don't have sex until you get married. That one's been around for a while. But it was, don't think about sex. Don't desire sex. Don't touch yourself.
Don't have a body.
Don't have a body. Right. Which is basically telling people not to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we started telling these messages when kids are 9, 10, 11, when they really believe that we know what we're saying and that they can, in fact, do this successfully. Yeah. Only to learn that they can't. No. So what they think is, it must be me. It must be me. Not there's something wrong with this message, but there's something wrong with me. And when you think about sexual shame, if you are in a family that is silent and shaming around bodies and sexuality, then you've actually been getting that message since you were itty bitty. Like most kids start realizing that they have control over their hands about 10 months old. They find their genitals somewhere around a year when they're getting their diaper changed or they're in the tub or something. And if that parent isn't there or caregiver isn't there to say, yep, that's your penis. It's a wonderful part of you. Or, yep, that's your vulva. Or, yep, you got a little thing there called the clitoris. It's wonderful. And then continues to wash them up and get them ready, whatever. If they have somebody that is reactive, goes like this, or slaps their hand away or something, that it at a subconscious level, right? Because the child's pre-verbal at this point. they get this message, something must be wrong with me because I'm just being me. I'm just being me. And they don't stop doing that natural thing until they're 5 or 6 and they're caught playing doctor or something. And at that point that they get in trouble, that memory might stick. And when it sticks, they start purposefully going underground, hiding it. But you have to know that it's happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before that, from 1 to 5. And so it's gotten deep in their DNA that something must be wrong with me because I keep inadvertently getting in trouble for just doing whatever I think, like whatever, I'm just being me. And that deep shame shapes how people believe they're worthy of love, right? And so then they start to put on a mask and they say, I'll show you what I think you want to see. But then when you love that, you're not really loving me, so I don't receive that love.
No, that's true.
And when I'm loving you, I'm doing it from a mask place, so I don't really believe me either. And it's deeply fundamental then to how we give and receive love. That's pretty core to our happiness, how we give and receive love in our lives. And yet that's exactly the place that we've been hurting people is right there, as opposed to, yep, that's your nose, that's your eyes, that's your ears, that's your penis, that's your vulva. It's a wonderful part of you. And we take care of it like we take care of our teeth. And you just weave it into all of life. But you have to grow up in a society that sees it all as good. And that we have a responsibility to do good things with our bodies and with our lives that, bless us and bless others, and that got all lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah. So how has this book been received?
So the book, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, I asked a couple of fundamental questions that I wanted to understand. And one of them was, how did the Christian church get sex negative? Was it ever sex positive? If it was sex positive, where was it sex positive? And what I learned was we've been sex negative in the formation of the Christian church since the 4th century. That's when Constantine he was emperor, he became a Christian. He then had the power to appoint the very first leaders of the church. And at that point, the men, they were men, were vying for leadership by showing who could deny the body the most. And that's what was happening at that particular time. And when they couldn't do it, because they couldn't do it, they blamed the women. And that has continued to be fundamental in the Christian church. So I asked the question, well, then not in the Christian development of the Christian church, then on the Abrahamic line, was there ever a place where it was positive? And so I got into Jewish writing that was way over my head, but wonderful nonetheless. And I learned that there had been some incredible sex positive stories that had been there for thousands of years and had never been brought forward in the formation of the Christian church. I had never heard them. And I just started writing them down like, oh my goodness, that these gifts were here. I mean, clearly there was, in this monotheistic way of thinking, there was a God that was saying, I created you on purpose. This is good. It's here to bless you. It's here to help you form bonds in your life that are meaningful and lasting. I mean, there was just so much there. And I was thrilled about that. And so I wrote about that. I wrote about the impact of consumerism on our sexual development too, because I think that has, in America, we sell bodies and we sell people, and then we expect them to feel good about themselves when we drive our economy on making sure you feel badly about yourself so that you keep purchasing things, right? And so it crashes in people's lives. And then this whole time that I was writing the book, I was working on what clinical interventions seem to help people heal sexual shame and claim themselves as good. And so I developed a model that I called Healing the Mess, the model for erasing sexual shame. And it has 4 basic processes that you do kind of over and over until the shame sort of drips slowly away. And it's frame, name, claim, and aim. And frame is get yourself a scaffolding, a frame of solid sex education. If you did not get that in America, most people have not. So Get yourself that education so that you know what is real and what isn't, what is true and what isn't, what is fantasy and what is reality. So get yourself that frame. Name is tell your story to someone who can be compassionate and empathic and hear you so that you can realize you're not alone, because you're not alone. I think 90 to 95% of people in America grow up in homes that are silent or silent and shaming, and they don't even know that there's nothing wrong with them. They're delightful and wonderful. They just grew up in a kind of messed up kind of system. Claim is learn to claim your body as good. No matter how it is, right? Our shape and size and the way that we age, it's very much determined by our heredity, much more than almost anything else. And so when we're saying every, woman needs to be 6'3" and 120 pounds or something ridiculous like that, it's really no, sweetie, you're supposed to be exactly how you are, however you are. And however you are, if you wake up in the morning and you're feeling okay in your body, it is a good day and it's a good body and it needs to be celebrated and you need to be celebrated. And I think we need to support each other in that. And so we have to do a lot of work because we are inundated day in, day out with messages that we're not okay. In America, we have 50% of 6-year-olds already modifying their diets, 6-year-old girls, 2/3 of 9-year-olds, and 90% of 15-year-olds. And so it's an enormous amount of work that we have to do to look ourselves in the mirror and say, that is good. That is good. So that is claim. When we keep working this frame, name, claim, what we end up doing is we begin to aim towards a brand new legacy. Rather than repeating and passing on the shame that we've grown up, we began to say, no, I want that. I want that legacy for me, and I want it for any little one in my life, and I'm going to do everything I can to pass on a different legacy. And so that's really the model for erasing sexual shame. And then at the very end of the book, I just gave some practices that people can do, touch and non-touch practices that people can do to begin to integrate sexuality and spirituality in a way that feels okay with them. That book took 11 years to write. It was not easy, and I felt like I was taking on the church, although I didn't necessarily want to, but I did want people to know that more was desired for them and that more was available to them. And so it took heart and soul for 11 years, and I got a really wonderful editor who helped me at the end, and some wonderful mentors that helped at the end, and it entered the world and has been doing really well, both in academic circles, but also in people's lives, everyday people's lives. And I wrote it to clinicians because at that moment in the development of clinical sexology, there wasn't any cultural competence that was around for how do you do work with people with this kind of background. But I filled it with so many stories that my hope is that it could be picked up by somebody who had experienced this and that they would find themselves in the book. And it's because they always say, don't ever write for two audiences. And I did, but it's been doing really well. And I think I've heard from people all over. It's making a difference, and that makes me really happy. So the second book that I wrote called Shameless Parenting, everything you need to raise shame-free, confident kids and heal your shame too, really grew out of people saying to me, Tina, I don't want to pass on the shame that I got, but I have no idea what to do. I don't even know what's normal at different ages. Like, I need help. And so I'm like, I've been teaching this stuff forever. I've been teaching it to doctors and therapists, and I will put together something that will hold your hand. And it's divided birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 2-year increments up to age 18. And it says basically, here's what they're going to do behaviorally in general. Here's what their emotional kind of tasks they're trying to accomplish. Here's the sensual or sexual curiosities that may emerge during this time. This is what it will look like when they act out of that place. And then I ask questions. How do you think that might be for you? So people can get in touch with if there's shame there for them. And then I offer questions that help people sort of think through, what did happen for me? If I feel that kind of feeling, I can ask, what do I think happened? And what would I have wanted? What would I have needed? So that they can begin to heal their shame, so then they can give their child what their child is needing. So I say to people, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just need to be a little bit ahead of them.
Yeah.
Just a little bit ahead. And so that's what that book does. It just, every 2 years, it says, here's the top resources to get. Here's the top books and websites. Here's the main stuff. Know this, you're good. You know, and in a year or two, look at the next section and you'll be good. So that was my attempt to really hold the hands of parents who were not wanting to pass on the shame that they had experienced.
So this is so great. And I think that I will put it on the website, how people can buy these books, because I think they're so interesting, even in the Swedish context. So this is so nice. And I think that shameless parenting, I think it's the huge thing. How has this book been received?
Well, it was just surprising to me. I think I was just putting it together to answer the questions and what I was being asked. And when it was released, it was a new release bestseller in 8 categories on Amazon right away. Yeah. And I was so thrilled because I thought, okay, so the teachers are happy with it. The medicine is happy with it. Everyday people are happy with it. And maybe it will do good out in the world.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you, Dr. Tina, for joining us today. It was so good. I could talk with you for hours, I know. So I hope that we will meet again next year.
I hope so.
Yes,
let's do that.
Yes. And I will link your homepage on my website so that the listeners can read about you more if they want to.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes. And have a great time in Sweden.
Thank you. I will. I will.
Thank you for this. Bye.
Bye.
Du har lyssnat till Lustpodden. För mer information och tips från programmet så hänvisar vi till lustpodden.se. Där kan du också kontakta oss om du vill vara med och berätta din berättelse om lust och relationer i terapi. Signaturmelodin är skapad av Johan Nilsson och redaktör och producent och ansvarig för klippning är Julia Linde.